All right, so today we have a really good topic. The topic of today is that there is no such thing as being strong enough, especially for a baseball player. Now, in this industry, what I've realized is that there are a lot of people who have been around for a very long time, and most new up and comers in this industry, as far as like strength and conditioning is concerned, kind of just take whatever they say to be correct because they've been around for a long time. And so most people in this industry think that there is diminishing returns by continuously chasing strength. And to a degree, they're correct. But I think they go about it in a very general sense that other people don't really understand. So when they hear that or they see that, they immediately assume, I am not going to pursue strength training to the maximal ability that I have, which is just not ideal. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to approach this from less of like a meathead perspective where it's like, I just love strength and I'm mad at anybody that comes against it. I'm going to come at this a little bit more educational so that way we can describe what strength really is, define the term, define how it's measured, and then talk about why it's so important that athletes continue to develop strength and not believe that there is such a thing as becoming too strong. Okay, so to start off, I think that baseball facilities and coaches everywhere have tried to create formulas and bullshit metrics that they've literally just made up on the spot. Meaning, if you become this strong in this exercise, if you're able to reverse lunge X amount, if you can do this exercise for X amount of reps, you're good. And you no longer need to pursue that. But that doesn't make any damn sense. And it was literally just pulled out of a hat. They don't really have the expertise to talk like that unless they actually define the terms of what strength really is, how it's measured, and why strength even exists. It doesn't matter to me that you have X amount of experience training athletes, and because some of the good ones ended up doing X, Y, and Z with exercises, that now that's how you're going to base your entire system off of. Okay, that's ridiculous to me. And so what I think is important is that first we define strength. All right, so this is coming straight from Verkhoshansky and Mel Siff, two of the most highly recognized sports scientists in the world. Okay, and so they define strength as the ability of a given muscle or group of muscles to generate muscular force under specific conditions. All right, so an example of a specific condition for a baseball player was when throwing a baseball, your external load is pretty much just your body because it's just a 5-ounce baseball. All right, so under that pretense, it's the interplay between your mass, your gravity that you're working against, and then the surface that you're also throwing on. All right, so that would be your external load would then just be your body, all right, because it's only a 5-ounce baseball. So at the most simplified level, if you raise your body's strength output in comparison to your body mass, which is the external load, then you raise your ability to throw harder, and that never changes. That never changes. That's just is what it is. It doesn't change just because you pushed your deadlift to a certain number and now you're not throwing harder. That doesn't change, okay? Now, granted, there are mechanics and efficiency of mechanics and how you organize your throwing development that matters, but in the most general sense, I think you understand what I'm talking about here. Increased strength is never really a bad thing because you're trying to raise the capacity of your body to be able to produce more force in less time and to be able to actually handle the demands of throwing extremely hard. So constantly getting better should be the goal, not maintaining, okay? Not maintaining. All right, so in my opinion, there's also been no player in the world in any sport who has ever come out and said that I know of, I am too strong for this sport. I have become too strong to throw this ball or too strong to hit this ball, and I need to take my strength down because it's hurting my performance. I've never heard of that in my life. But when you read all these blogs from other people in the industry, you kind of think that that's how it goes. Like once you hit a certain level of strength, boom, you got to change the focus. Okay, and so in my opinion, I think that's when players are just misguided by the systems that they're currently using. And so I think an outdated system of training is actually linear periodization. And so for those of you who don't know what that is, that in the most basic terms, that's where you just focus on a general quality for a specific amount of time, and then you move on to the next quality. A lot of people do it as like low intensity, high volume of work, transitioning over to high intensity, low volume of work. Another way of thinking about it is like hypertrophy endurance, and then going over to a maximal strength phase where your only focus is putting weight on the bar and like getting stronger, and then you transfer over to the next focus or the next quality that you want to train, which would be your speed focus, where it's a lot of sprints, jumps, and speed lifts. Okay, but it's a vicious cycle of maintenance when you go through linear periodization. I know this from personal experience and after training a few thousand athletes now under this system that we currently use, which is the Conjugate System. So the reason why I didn't like linear periodization, I tested it for years on myself, and I also tested it for a year or two with a couple hundred athletes when I was training people for free back in the day. And the thing that I didn't like about it is that after a year long of training, the athletes would start back in the next off season similar to where they started at the beginning of the last off season. Okay, so they would go 12 months of rigorous training and extremely hard work to not get that much better. All right, now granted, a handful of those months were in the off season, and then a larger handful was in season. Okay, but that's beside the point. You should still be able to continuously get better throughout a year-long training cycle. Throughout your macro cycle, you should be able to get better. Okay, so, and that's getting better without looking at it from like a genetics perspective or just puberty. Okay, so, the 15-year-old kid that goes and turns 16 the following year, he's probably just going to get better because his hormones are actually in place now. He's able to pack on some lean mass now, and he is just genetically like becoming a bigger, better man, right? But I'm talking about strictly from a training stimulus standpoint. We should be able to continuously get better year after year after year. It should at least be the goal. Okay, now how much better? Yeah, a professional athlete is only going to get incrementally better every year, right? The novice and intermediate, they're going to get a lot better every year, or they should. But what I was noticing with linear periodization is that they weren't. They weren't getting significantly better. They weren't improving specific qualities in their training at a high rate, at a fast rate. It just wasn't happening. Okay, so what we decided to do, I started looking into Louis Simmons' Westside Barbell and the Conjugate System back in 2014 and 15. And at that time, it was very new to me. It was really hard to understand. And so I just started doing a bunch of research on the maximal effort method, dynamic effort method, the repeated effort method, and I kind of started to put it together. After a year of training, and I didn't know what I was doing, the results were still 10 times better than what we had with linear periodization. Okay, and at this time, I was a college athlete. So most of the athletes that I had training for free, I was just trying to figure stuff out. Okay, so I wasn't charging anybody, but all the people that I had training for free were similar to me. Okay, so they were mostly college guys. There were some indie ball guys, some guys trying to make it in pro ball. And so these are like pretty well-trained men. These weren't 12 and 13-year-old kids that I was training for free. These were men, okay? And to see that even though I didn't really know what I was doing at the beginning, I didn't have the system very well organized. I wasn't matching up the stimulus. My programs weren't blending and complementing their throwing programs very well, or what they were doing on the hitting side very well, or their in-season workload very well. Like, it just wasn't planned extremely well because I was just in the learning phases. But the results were still better at the end of the first year, and that immediately caught my eye. Okay, so that was like practical application 101, the actual scientific method. Find something that you think may work, test it, trial and error on a large population of athletes for a long period of time, and then rule out what works and what doesn't work. And I ruled out linear periodization the moment that happened. Okay, and so the reason why we ended up switching fully over to the conjugate system and why I kept diving into it is because of the results that we had. And one of the reasons why I love it so much is because it's full of variety with different intensities, volumes, and a constant rotation of methods. So you can try to continuously pursue strength, and you also improve all the other physical qualities that you need to improve as a baseball player, such as explosive strength, speed strength, reactive ability, elastic ability, and things like that. And when you compare it to linear periodization, what the conjugate system allows you to do is constantly chase your maximal strength, okay? But simultaneously, you're not taking time away from any other qualities of training. What linear periodization did was prioritize one quality at a time, which made your progress very slow. And while you were emphasizing that one quality, all the other qualities were taking a back seat at that time. The conjugate system allowed you to chase all qualities at once. And because I knew what a baseball player needed, because I played baseball my whole life, and I've now been training a few hundred athletes at this time, I realized that we needed an optimal surplus of explosive strength, reactive ability, and elastic ability. So we were able to get that from the dynamic effort method, which I'll touch on here in a minute. And then we were also able to continuously push our strength without feeling any type of diminishing returns using the maximal effort method that Louis put in place with Westside Barbell, which is a constant rotation of exercises with the maximal effort method. And you're not doing it to just get better at one lift. No, you're doing it for the internal benefits of what it really means to lift a maximal effort weight. And so I'll get into that now. With the maximal effort method, this is where people claim that lifting heavy weights doesn't transfer over to how fast an athlete can move or explosive strength. Okay, because what they see is the external stimulus of the athlete moving slowly, lifting a heavy weight. Okay, but what they don't see is internally what's going on. Internally, you are not moving slow at all. Your motor neurons, your muscle fibers, and your CNS are synergistically working together. Okay, and as they work together, you are firing the fastest twitch muscle fibers that you have in your body at once. Okay, so it's not a slow thing. Like when you nobody lifts a maximal weight slowly. Okay, it may appear externally that it's slow, but internally it's the fastest thing that you can do in sports. All right, so that's really important to know, because I've also seen a lot of blogs and articles from other training facilities and other baseball coaches that talk about how you doing that makes you a slower moving human. But the only time that that happens is when your focus is that one quality for a continuous block, and you're not also focusing on bringing up other qualities, which is the fall of linear periodization. All right, so aside from that, maximal effort work, it is the best method ever created for intramuscular coordination and intermuscular coordination. Okay, so I'm going to break this down as simple as I can. I know those words sound fancy, but intramuscular coordination with an A is the efficiency of different parts of a singular muscle working in unison. Okay, so it's that one muscle's basically ability to max out its capacity. All right, intermuscular coordination is the harmony of different muscles working together to perform whatever movement that you're trying to perform for that maximal effort lift. Okay, so that's how you're going to actually improve intermuscular coordination when you're lifting a maximal effort weight. All right, so it's not about the weight on the bar. It's not about you just increasing your deadlift or your back squat or your bench press. It's about way more than that. It's about what's happening internally. Okay, and I think people approach it very generally, and they look at it as like you're moving slow with a barbell, and it doesn't matter how much weight you lift because you can't deadlift a baseball. But that is so simplistic that it's actually stupid. Okay, and then we also have to look at the Hemi size principle. Okay, so smaller muscle fibers are more so for endurance, but larger muscle fibers are for your power activities. And when you do a maximal effort rep, you're utilizing your larger muscle fibers. Okay, so that's really important to know. So as the force demands of the activity increases, the percentage of the muscle fibers recruited also increases. All right, so only the maximal effort activities are the largest muscle fibers that get utilized. All right, so this also helps the maximal effort method. One of the best parts about it is that it helps you get significantly stronger without putting on a bunch of excess weight. Okay, so I don't know if you remembered what I said earlier about how it's important for an athlete to be able to increase their strength so that they can move their body better later on when we were talking about specific strengths for a baseball player and we were talking about the throw, because you're only fighting, your gravity and your mass at that point, and you're trying to utilize your body better. So if you increase your strength in the body, then now you actually raise the ability for you to throw harder. Okay, that's why this is important, because you can increase your top level of strength without actually increasing your mass. Okay, because the volume is very low on maximal effort. So all you're doing, it's CNS, right? It's internal. So you're increasing your strength significantly without having to pack on a bunch of size in order to do so. All right, so on dynamic effort, this is where the system really comes into play. All right, this is where athletes also can focus on their rate of force development and do all the speed lifts and all the jumping and all the plyometric exercises. So the dynamic effort method is lifting a light weight quickly. Generally, it's about 50% of what you would lift on your maximal effort rep. So an example of that would be, let's say I have a 400-pound deadlift. Okay, for my speed weight to move at like 0.8 meters per second, which is like the gospel for most strength coaches on speed days, my speed weight would be 200 pounds, so it'd be about half of that. But if I can increase that number to about 450, let's say 500 pounds, if I take my deadlift from 400 to 500 pounds, now my speed weight to move at 0.8 meters per second is going to be about 250 pounds. So I have now been able to move heavier weights faster, which is the benefit of raising the ceiling of your maximal strength. Another benefit as to why there is no such thing as becoming too strong. Okay, so when utilizing both the maximal effort method and the dynamic effort method, now you can actually see the interplay between the strengths. You can increase your explosive strength and your rate of force development. You can simultaneously constantly chase being a stronger moving human and improving your ceiling. Okay, I call absolute strength, the ceiling for an athlete, because the higher that gets, just like the 400-pound deadlift to the 500-pound deadlift increases your speed weight from 200 to 250, right? The higher that ceiling is, now the more potential that you have to increase your explosive strength. Okay, it's never a bad thing to move heavier weights faster than you did before. It's never a bad thing. So the next part of the system is the repeated effort method. It's a little bit outside the scope of what this talk is about with continuously chasing strength and why there is no such thing as being too strong, but I'm still going to touch on it a little bit so those who are listening can understand why the system works so well. The repeated effort method is utilized so that way now we can pack on size as well. Okay, so we're not packing on size with the main lifts, okay, because on the bar, generally our volume's too low on max effort to get bigger. And on dynamic effort, although the volume is high, we're staying in that 2 to 5 rep range. So it's not a ton of time under tension in order to actually increase the size of our tissues. Whereas dynamic or repeated effort work allows us to actually hammer out our accessory movements and really gain the size that the athletes need, because a lot of baseball players are undersized. Okay, now, to kind of bring this full circle, I think a lot of baseball coaches in this day and age are so focused on first you have to get bigger, okay? And then you need to get stronger. But then there's going to be a point where you hit a plateau, okay? And when that plateau happens, it's time to change everything, not pursue strength anymore because you've hit X, Y, and Z numbers that we just made up and pulled out of a hat because of some players that we worked with. And then now all you're going to do is focus on speed work, okay? And yes, you may see an increase from that, but that's only because you have prioritized linear periodization within your training and you've seen diminishing returns on your investment because you have isolated specific lifts for so long and specific blocks of training for so long that now you need something new. So when you start to conjugate your own sequence and switch over to speed work and make that primarily your main emphasis with plyometrics, reactive ability exercises, and things like that, now you start to see gains. But what they don't tell you is that if you would have started right from the beginning, you probably would have had a way higher athletic ability sooner in your career than what you're doing right now, okay? Which is unfortunate, in my opinion. No athlete should go through a full training cycle for a full year and feel like they didn't get better. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. And it's the one thing that we don't have is time. You can always get your money back, but you can never get your time back, okay? And so the last thing that I'll say is even mobility training, true mobility training, is strength training. So if there was this weird preconceived notion about how I can become too strong, that means that now you can't increase your mobility anymore, right? That also doesn't make sense. Passive flexibility training is somebody like stretching you, okay? So imagine I have my arm up, I'm trying to get into external rotation. Somebody takes my hand and pulls me back and stretches me into external rotation, okay? Or a lot of people who are listening to this on the podcast, you can't see my face. Maybe I'm doing the sleeper stretch. If you know what that is, that's the shoulder being hammered into internal rotation, okay? If that's happening, that's just a passive movement. That's not increasing my mobility. That's increasing my flexibility. Mobility training requires a strength stimulus. It requires force in order for you to gain active range of motion, not passive range of motion. So that means I need to actually train to increase that range of motion using either a self-isometric force, which I like to call irradiation, which is where you are making the load from your body harder by constantly tensing those tissues and then trying to hammer yourself into a larger range of motion by just using your body. Nobody's pulling you there. You're actually trying to get there yourself. We can do it that way, or you can do it under load, okay? And that's another way to increase your mobility. But nonetheless, increasing your actual mobility happens from force. It requires a strength stimulus. It is not a passive thing, okay? So even if mobility training requires you to constantly chase strength, I think it can be pretty well stated that there is no such thing as being too strong, because in that point, you're also saying there's a limit to how much mobility that training that you can actually do, which there is no limit. Granted, there are certain ranges of motion and certain exercises that you need to be able to, or certain positions you need to be able to get into more so than others. Yes, I understand that. But in the grand scheme of things, like, you can keep training mobility, right? And you can keep pursuing strength. So I think that if you're an athlete listening to this podcast and you've been duped by there is a limit, a diminishing return limit to pursuing strength, I think what you're really seeing is that the individual that's saying that, maybe the coach of the facility, is limited on the systems that they actually put in place for the athlete. And how they orchestrate their training is what is limiting athletes. And that's where their athletes are starting to see diminishing returns, because the methods are sound. These are scientific sound methods that have been in place for years. Okay, they work. It's not the method's fault. It's not scientific literature's fault. It is definitely the coach's fault who actually inputs the system to train the athletes. So if your athletes aren't getting better, if your athletes are always seeing diminishing returns whenever you chase strength, think about how your interplay between maximal effort work, dynamic effort work, and repeated effort work, think about that interplay that you have. And then question yourself. Blame yourself. Blame how you actually orchestrate your methods, but don't blame the methods, because the methods are sound and they work for a reason. They've worked for us for almost a decade now, and we continue to see really good results. An example, and then we'll get to the end of this podcast, but an example of this is we had an athlete come in, Jordan Brewer. He was like 195 pounds when he came in. He's with the Astros, and he has had some knee surgeries and knee issues in the past. He's had a lot of surgeries, actually. He's had a lot of injuries in the past. And the organization that he was working with, they didn't really want to stress him that much because they were afraid of hurting him, and rightfully so. That's a paycheck, okay? You don't really want to hurt your athletes. But in my opinion, not stressing him was the reason why he was being stagnant in his performance and stagnant in his physical abilities. So we stressed the hell out of him. We had him do maximal effort work. He could recover from that really easy. He's an advanced athlete, professional athlete, high-level athlete. He could do max effort work 2 to 3 times a month on both upper and lower body. And he did dynamic effort every week. We systematized his jumping and his plyometrics. Long story short, that kid ended up gaining 20 pounds in the offseason, which he's never done that. He put on 20 pounds in the offseason, increased almost 100 pounds on every single one of his lifts. This is 3 to 4 months, by the way. 3 to 4 months. And then when he got back and he tested with his org, he blew his force plate test out of the water on every single thing that they tested him on. His sprints were faster. His jumps were higher. He produced more force in less time. He blew every test out of the water, so much so that they decided to test him for steroids. Okay, and so that's a high-level athlete that's been in the league for years. And because he wasn't getting stressed and his training wasn't systematized in this way, he saw diminishing returns in what he was currently doing. He had the strength blocks. He had the hypertrophy blocks. He had the low endurance blocks, right? And then he had the speed blocks. But that wasn't the thing that he needed in order to progress and get to the next level in his physical performance. Okay, so I'll leave you guys with that. Anyways, I'm going to end it with there is no such thing as becoming too strong.